say something like a person suffering from hysteria, a person suffering from say autism, there is a huge level of diversity involved. Even in those cases, regardless of what that person's mental state might be, the fact that that person is associated with other members of his or her community, that person is intrinsically tied to other people's lives as community, as belongs to community, entitles the person to a full moral status. Further, we would also argue that this argument of intellectual capacity is also very, there is no specific criteria to decide what has intellectual capacity, what amounts to intellectual disability. Something like even a person who is autistic, there are different types of autism. There may be persons who are autistic who have very different special abilities. Further, there are people with Down syndrome. How do you categorize someone as having intellectual disability and not having full moral status and all? So this will in fact be a very problematic question to make that a person with intellectual disability should not have full moral status, because the categorization, there is no specific ground on which categorization can be clearly made. The last set of arguments that we want to follow is that firstly, the argument, the key categories of reason that we give for a person to have full moral status, that the person should be treated fairly, that the person should be given aid. So that applies even to person with intellectual disabilities. One objection that can possibly be raised that maybe there is a need for treating them with the level of paternalism. There may be a need to give them a helping hand, but that does not mean that they are not entitled to full moral status, because here we can make a parallel to the affirmative action argument, saying that if they have a lesser head start compared to others, they may need some special labor. Does not mean that we must take away the full moral status. Also, the argument that the kind of question will be putting forward that they should be given lesser moral status because, well, whatever reason they might move forward. But the point is, it's a very dangerous and slippery slope, because once you start treating them not equally and on an unequal plane, it can always degenerate to at an extremist habit activities like the ones Nazis did. So it's a very slippery slope argument. So lastly, we would conclude by saying that if there is an ambiguity on whether this should be given full moral status or not, let's are on the side of caution and give them full moral status rather than exclusion.
Very good. Anybody else in the team want to? Yep.
So at that point, we should look at whether we can do something to provide them that service while protecting them. And since duty to interfere does not protect the threat of movement, we could always look at that as the option instead of giving them lesser moral status after giving them. Also to look at examples to substantiate why we do this. The first thing that comes to mind is the report or the previous case of the dog and the knife that happened to one. And it's a great book. It talks about a boy with autism, and it's on the high end of the autism spectrum. But he still manages to do everything that an ordinary 15-year-old boy would do, while supporting him doing exceptionally well in A levels as far as so they are slowly, maybe, I don't want to use the word slower, but maybe they're different in how they come to the same end that they do at fully functioning cognitive systems. But that doesn't mean that they can't use the same end. So, given that situation, full model status is better model.
Great. So, yeah, did you want to add something?
think the emphasis should be on the education part. That is your creative work. You want to be teachers who want to try and afford you.
Interesting. So, if I can sum up, what you're really saying is that the criteria should focus on capacity to feel pain and pleasure, to have an emotional life, to engage in relationships, and to have oneself reflected back in the relationships. And yeah, okay, plus the slippery slope argument. By the way, wonderful article in the Harvard Law Review by Friedrich Schauer, simply called Slippery Slopes. Every law student should read that article, quite apart from this course. A judge shouldn't do this, I know. Okay, let's hear from you. Who's going to go first? Chaos in the B team.
The bottom line is that for any form of cooperative arrangement and it's working, you require people at the center of it who can act on their self-interest. And if moral status is closely tied to the ability to make decisions, to evaluate risks, and to possibly even pursue beneficial consequences, then the moment you move away from that standard, you will not only have a framework where self-interest is not pursued, but even cooperative behavior becomes less likely. So essentially the contractarian claim, which I'm defending in very conservative terms. But the second part of argument is just to engage with what they are saying. The question of paternalism is inherent in both of our complications as well as privacy. Whether it's a parent-child relationship, whether it's a teacher-student relationship, or even the question of employer-employee relationship. In fact, much of the recent literature is not calling it paternalism, but they're calling it relationships based on trust. So if trust requires a certain negation of moral status at times in terms of justification, we don't think we have problems with that. Of course, that's not my personal opinion, but that's how the argument can be done.
So in other words, handing over your personhood to a third party, provided it's a relationship of trust.
It may not be the worst idea. It possibly works, and it does work even in scenarios where there is no question of lesser moral status.
I mean, it gives rise to the issue about transferring personhood under certain circumstances, but also can one voluntarily surrender one's personhood? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
What kind of response I'm thinking of is that even in scenarios when we don't dispute full moral status, there is a surrender of judgment, there is an implicit acceptance in institutional behavior. So what's so different when we talk about a lower moral status and then link it to, let's say, a scenario which is what you're describing. So it's not so much a question of choice, just describe things as they are. That if a child is accepting the judgment of her parents, or if a student is cooperating with the rules of a university, how is that different from a person with intellectual disabilities essentially relying upon a third party to make decisions on their behalf? Of course, I mean, consent is very clearly the objective.
Not a person, not a person.
Yeah.
Did you say consent?
No, I mean, you had brought up the issue of consent in your comment.
Yeah.
So obviously, consent is not going to be given to one weightage in the way I was constructing that argument.
Yeah. No, okay. Do you have any answer to or response to the arguments put forward? Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, because the older distinction that negative and positive rights distinction. So protection from interference is essentially that somebody else is recognizing your autonomy by not interfering with your actions. Whereas the moment we talk about paternalism, the framework is the opposite. That somebody else has to take on the responsibility of enabling me to access housing, access healthcare, access education. So speaking to that older distinction between negative and positive rights.
Well, except that in the mental health law field, we rationalize paternalism not for its own sake, but because we acknowledge that one of the core values of our legal order is autonomy, and that because the person currently lacks autonomy, we intervene in order to restore him or her to his autonomy. We're not interfering to actually take away permanently any of his autonomous rights, whereas in the context of intellectual disability, it's quite different because we are actually intervening to civilly kill the person and then transplant their personhood into the hands of third parties, namely guardians. And one of the big issues through time is that we've sought to regulate that reality in law by insisting that the guardian, in all of his or her actions, adhere to, quote unquote, the best interests of the person. But actually most of the research shows that, number one, that doesn't work, and number two, it's exposed a lot of people to a lot of harm, particularly in segregated and isolated institutions. I shouldn't be saying this, I'm the judge.
I think the popular culture example we were discussing was the one who could nest.
Yeah.
They kind of captures that debate in a popular form.
But do I hear you right to say that people with intellectual disabilities, when held against the standard, the conventional standard, well, first of all, you're agreeing that the conventional standard should be the standard? You are?
I'm kind of putting it the other way around.
Now, I want to know what standard you're holding them to account to. They're saying it should be relationships, capacity to hold emotions, exhibit emotions. At a low level, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just a spark is enough. What do you think of that? What they are basically doing is they're moving away from the conventional criteria of cognitive capacity at a high level. They're super adding into it other criteria like relationships, emotional ability, and so forth. And they're directly challenging you as to what your standard is, or whether you agree with them, whether that's the standard.
With regard for the other is the standard, that's exactly where our relation is. The concept of people protecting yourself, what will regard for the other mean?
Capable of protecting yourself. Yeah.
He decided that intellectual disability is not include.
Yeah, let's say from it's congenital rather than from a brain injury.
You have decided that it is.
Yes, I have decided. I'm the judge. Fiat of the will. Not sure it makes a huge difference one way or the other, but you can argue the toss. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it's congenital for the moment. So, any other voices?
Sources allocation as per the discussing in society. So for the person with intellectual disability to need some more resources. So talk about in terms of utility as a whole. I guess at that point you can support that.
So you're not necessarily agreeing with him, are you? I mean, you're building up the support paradigm as distinct from the protection paradigm, right?
More like a functional test. You're not deciding right at the beginning that they don't have any capacity as such.
Yeah.
Yeah, lesser morals. You need to provide a system.
Oh, okay. So you're accepting that there's a lesser moral status, but then a duty to support kicks in. And
That's what makes the protective paradigm, is the following paradigm. It's fine, the group needs help, so let's do this.
yeah. So are you necessarily disagreeing? No? Do you take exception to what they're saying, or do you welcome the concession on their part?
Concept of consent and protective paradigm which they're putting forward, I would say that as Nalsar also every person at some point in life or at some point in life also relies on is recipient of some level of state paternalism or paternalism for someone else. Does that mean would they then view full moral status as something which is temporal? Would they say that a person say had an accident and if the parent fills up a form for them getting treated in the hospital, would you say that the person loses its full moral status? So, in that case, what we would say that full moral status is something that accrues as we argued on basis of special relationship, on the basis of a low cognitive threshold that we have argued, and it's not a scale or it's not a temporal, does not depend upon the person's ability or situation in life at that time. Every person, every properly quote-unquote normal person may go through different phases in life in which that person may need support, trust, as Siddhartha put it, or some level of paternalism. That does not disentitle them from a level of moral status. That's basically our understanding.
So you're saying essentially that
The difference between a person with intellectual disability and a person with, say, who was just met an accident, or a person who just freezes in face of a danger and needs someone else to bail him out in favor, it's a difference of degree. Does not mean that both of them are very radically different, or both of them are, in our view, entitled to.
so essentially you're saying the traditional criteria need to be complemented to with additional criteria. You're not by definition supplanting or getting rid of cognition.
These examples, there is always in every your mental capacity statute says that a person with mental incapacity can still validly sign a contract when he is lucid.
When he's
Lucid. That's the term used.
okay.
What we are saying that even a lucid person can have moments of mental incapacity. If that does not disentitle that person from moral status, the reverse should also not disentitle the person from moral
But is lucid code word for is cognitively active? Is that what you mean?
What we are saying is we are running the unknown head because we do not agree to the criteria of lucidity as mental rationality or anything. We are saying if a lucid person who still may have some momentary lapse of reason or momentary lapse of lucidity and does not make that person who is full moral status. A person with mental disability should also not be denied the full moral status just because may or may not come in.
Yeah. Well, what's the norm? What's the standard? Oh, so you're accepting that as the standard?
Arguing but not accepting.
Okay. But I hear contradictory statements. I mean, on one hand you're saying cognitive ability is not where it's at. And on the other hand you're saying you have some people with intellectual disabilities who are not allowed to make decisions, but they have lucid moments and then they can. Is that what you're saying? No.
The question of some level of low level of cognitive ability, like emotional emotions and
Yeah.
pain, entitled the person to moral status, but just an argument, not conceding, but for the sake of argument, just engaging with the
rational.
Say, like for example, maybe comfortable with the presence of his parents, taking on the presence of his people, so communicating his interest perfectly. So that is the that makes level of thought that you mentally form being able to possibly into a right.
Well, we can always rationalize our decisions from whatever wellspring. And let's say emotionally I decide to spend my allowance of 100 euros a week buying Star Trek movies instead of feeding myself. You're saying that that's a valid decision, it's coming from a person of equal moral status, and there are no grounds to interfere even in his best interests. Or am I putting words in your mouth? Let's hear from this side. Yeah.
They're mentally capable and everything can take a decision. So I don't think in that neglected stability as a person what's up so they don't need as a moral support or a thing. If they're mentally capable or this thing could be
But already in saying mentally capable, you're accepting that mental capacity is actually the threshold test, right? Of course, one of the interesting things about people who suffer brain injury and who therefore acquire intellectual disabilities is they have a past, they have an identity, there's something you can retrieve to help them make decisions, to support them make decisions, or arguably make decisions for them. Co-decision making, okay. I'm not sure you really disagree all that much. Sorry?
You're talking about lesser moral status.
So you are accepting the concept of lesser moral status, okay? And are you accepting that concept as well? No. Full moral status. Okay. Yeah.
Possibly eliminate what is the less moral status, like you are, or insecure in their being in some way that we're not talking about representation. We acknowledge that that's possibility. Here, this debate, you don't have to.
We're talking about subjects.
It's about whether they have possibility.
Yeah.
Is that much? So I think in their argument itself is this idea that there's a norm. That there's a cognitive norm which is sometimes becomes full and it sometimes suspended.
Yeah.
So that there is a problem with the person with a lesser cognitive ability. So that argument itself is hidden this fact that there is a societal problem and
Well, they are
not be treated similarly because it is suspended.
They are conceding that somebody with lucid moments has full moral status, but then the implication is that somebody who doesn't have these lucid moments.
There is a societal problem, which means that we are accepting that it's a part of society. Thereby meaning that they're meeting some basic criteria which is making them part of society. This is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
In the psychiatric status of every member. Yeah, the idea is fix their meeting. Which is why they're part of the society. So because they're members of society, they are fully part. They have to be
Okay, you didn't say that at the beginning. So mere membership of the political community is enough. Okay. Full moral status, regardless of their cognitive capacity? Or would you say cognitive capacity is important but set it at a very low threshold? Okay. Sophisticated. I'm not sure we've solved it, but I think you have excavated the issues pretty well, and you know where the divisions are, and that's as much as we can hope for. I think in this class, what we're doing tomorrow is we're going into the dark side. We're doing one class just exposing you to the field of sociobiology, which takes a very, very extreme view, which is that what we've been talking about so far is utterly meaningless. That the fine debates that the ethicists have makes no sense, because they're all presuming that there is a self. Maybe there's some room for debate about whether the self is highly individuated, relatively individuated, or more socialized than we think. Sociobiologists don't even enter that debate. It doesn't exist. And one of the interesting books is You Are an Illusion. The idea that you exist as a person is just fanciful air. And it's a little bit like the law and economics field, that it's not just interesting in explicating doctrine and borderlines between doctrine and how doctrine evolves from one period to another. It has a prescriptive value as well. They're aiming, just like the law and economics people have aimed in the past, to tell you how to restructure legal fields. And the most controversial application, of course, is in the criminal law field, where ideas of autonomy, responsibility, accountability make no sense to the sociobiologist. So I'm just giving you one article to look at. There's also some video resources that I've put there for you to listen to. And so we'll climb into the dark side tomorrow and see how we emanate from that. So well done. Thank you very much. You owe each other a round of applause, I think. Oh, I haven't said who won. Let's leave that to the very end of the course.